All right, it's Lieutenant Christopher Cook, Arlington PD, C-H-R-I-S-T-O-P-H-E-R-C-O-O-K, Lieutenant with Arlington Police Department. Around 4:15 this afternoon, we responded to a domestic disturbance at an apartment complex in the 2100 block of Park Springs Boulevard, which is right up the street. As officers arrived on scene at the apartment complex, the domestic disturbance was between a mother and two brothers. They were able to coax out the brother and the mother. The call actually originated from a third party whom one of the brothers had contacted saying, hey, my other brother, who is going to be our suspect, had a firearm and was making threatening statements with the gun towards the other brother. As officers determined there was no one else inside the apartment but just the suspect, officers tried to make entry through the front door to talk to the suspect, not knowing that he was going to be armed or not. Is when officers began to try to negotiate with him, and they noticed he did have a handgun and he was making statements towards police like shoot me, stuff like that. Officers continued to negotiate, saying they didn't want to shoot the suspect and that they wanted to figure out what was going on. At that point, they saw the suspect put on what we believe to be body armor, which is protective elements of clothing that can help slow down or reduce the likelihood of being injured or killed if you're struck with a projectile. At that point, officers kind of backed out of the apartment and kind of contained the perimeter, waiting for additional units to arrive on scene. A short time later, they heard glass breakage, and what we realized later, the suspect actually began breaking into the apartment next to his apartment and made entry into that apartment to formulate an escape plan. As officers were trying to shore up the perimeter, when they realized that a second apartment was being breached, that's when they noticed the suspect escaped their perimeter and forced his way into another motorist vehicle. There's a white vehicle that's behind us on the street that's parked sideways. We believe that the suspect approached the driver of that vehicle at gunpoint, ordered him out of the car, and stole his vehicle. Officers began to pursue the suspect at that point, which we ended up over here onto Park Springs Boulevard and Shady Valley. As officers rounded the corner, they noticed that the suspect had already exited the car and began walking northbound on Shady Valley Drive. Officers reported that it appeared that the suspect was trying to gain entry into a possible residence, was going up, knocking on doors, trying to shake door handles and stuff like that. At that point, we continued to negotiate and tried to effect the surrender of the suspect, but again, he still had the handgun in his hand, was still wearing what we believe to be body armor. Some officers even reported that initial context thought that he might have been wearing a mask as well. As officers began to formulate a pretty good perimeter, we were not going to allow him to exit the perimeter again. We were not going to allow him to gain entry to another residence. So we continued to give him surrender protocols. At some point during this encounter, the suspect rounded between two of the houses, and there was some confrontation between one of our officers and the suspect. That officer did discharge his firearm and struck the suspect. We began CPR, and unfortunately the suspect was pronounced deceased at the scene. There were no officers injured, there were no citizens injured in this encounter, and we're very lucky that he did not come upon another motorist or that he was able to gain entry into a residence, because his behavior was very chaotic, again carrying a firearm, asking the police to kill him, and making statements of that matter. So that's where we're at right now. We're going to be out here for several hours. We'll have to process the crime scene. We began to interview all the officers that are on scene, and also we have several witnesses. We have witnesses that observed the carjacking down here on Park Springs Boulevard. We also have some witnesses that observed the suspect running between the houses. So a lot of interviews got to be taking place, and we'll begin to build what we, a sequencing of events and try to figure out what led up to this encounter.
What time did you say everything started?
So the domestic call came in at 4:14 p.m. And about the time when he was able to escape the perimeter and actually carjack the other victim, that was about 5 o'clock, so about 45 minutes after. So we were on scene for several minutes, as you can see, trying to negotiate and find a peaceful outcome. But for whatever reason, the suspect refused to put his gun down and then again confronted one of our officers, and you just can't do that.
Is there any description of the suspect that you can release at this point?
Is an adult male. That's all we have at this point. The medical examiner obviously will do a formal identity once all the next of kin notifications come in.
Any idea what started this argument between his family?
Don't know exactly. It looked like it started between the two brothers, and maybe the mother just happened to be at the scene. And that's one thing that detectives have tried to get to the bottom of. But we know that one of the brothers contacted a third party saying there was a disturbance going on inside the apartment and that his brother had a gun and a